My name's Emily, I'm 29, and 2 nights ago my parents sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "You've got 48 hours to get your stuff out, your sister owns this house now." After years of sacrifices, I was blindsided by the betrayal that followed. You won't believe what I uncovered. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama and the courage to fight back. I'll never forget the sound of my mother's voice that night. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was cold. She set her coffee cup down on the table with a dull clink and said words that flipped my entire world upside down. "Emily, you've got 48 hours to pack your things. Your sister owns this house now." At first, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I just finished a 12-hour shift at the diner, my feet sore, my apron still smelling faintly of grease and coffee. I thought maybe my mom was joking in her awkward, dry way. But then I looked up at her face. She wasn't smiling. My dad sat beside her, arms crossed, looking at me like a stranger. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice cracking. My younger sister, Hannah, stood in the doorway holding a set of keys. She was only 25, with freshly manicured nails and that smug little smirk I'd grown used to over the years. She twirled the keys on her finger like she was some kind of landlord. "They signed the house over to me," she said, her tone dripping with pride. "It's mine now. You need to be out by Sunday." I couldn't breathe for a second. This was the house I'd grown up in, the house I'd stayed in even as an adult because I helped pay the bills when Mom and Dad struggled. While Hannah went to college on loans I co-signed, I stayed behind, worked shifts, and made sure the mortgage never went unpaid. "You can't be serious," I whispered. My chest felt tight, my heart pounding against my ribs. "I've lived here my whole life. I've helped keep this place standing." "Why would you?" "Because Hannah deserves stability," Dad interrupted sharply. "She's starting her own business, she needs a safe place. You're strong enough to figure things out. You always do." That line, "you always do," hit me like a punch in the stomach. For years, I'd been the dependable one. The one who fixed broken faucets, worked double shifts, cooked dinner when Mom was too tired, and kept quiet when Hannah came home with expensive shopping bags she couldn't afford. I thought being dependable meant being valued. But now, I realized it just meant being used. Hannah jingled the keys again, walking past me toward the living room like she already owned it. She dragged her fingertip along the mantel, brushing off dust. "I'll probably repaint in here. Maybe finally get rid of that old couch." That couch, the one I bought secondhand after saving tips for months. 48 hours, Emily, Mom repeated, softer this time, almost like she wanted to sound kind. But her eyes were hard. "It'll be easier if you don't drag this out." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat burned with words I couldn't form, tears I refused to let fall in front of them. Instead, I stood up, walked down the hall to my room, and closed the door quietly behind me. Inside, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the walls. My posters, my books, the quilt I'd had since I was a teenager, it all looked different now. Not like home. Like items in a storage unit I'd been renting by accident. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat awake, knees pulled to my chest, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Every sound felt sharper, every shadow heavier. Around 2 in the morning, I heard them talking in the kitchen again. "She can't know the real reason," my mom whispered. My dad hushed her quickly. "Don't start that now. She'll be gone soon. That's all that matters." My stomach flipped. The real reason? What did that mean? The next day, I started packing. Not because I accepted what they'd done, but because I couldn't think of another option. I folded my work uniforms, stuffed my notebooks into a box, and wrapped mugs in old t-shirts. Each item I touched carried memories, late nights studying in high school, laughter from friends who'd come over, mornings when I'd wake early to help Mom before her shift. With every box I sealed, anger bubbled hotter inside me. How could they erase me so easily? At one point, Hannah walked in without knocking. "Make sure you don't take anything that belongs to the house," she said, eyeing the lamp I'd bought from Target. "This is mine," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. She shrugged, lips curling. "We'll see." After she left, I sat on the floor and buried my face in my hands. The humiliation stung worse than the betrayal. They didn't even care that I had nowhere to go, no plan. To them, I was disposable. By the evening, I had 3 boxes stacked against the wall. That's when an old memory surfaced, me at 19, signing a check to help cover the mortgage after Dad lost his job. I remembered the way he'd hugged me and said, "We'd be lost without you, Emily." Now, just 10 years later, they were pushing me out like yesterday's trash. Before bed, I took a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool, the street quiet except for the hum of crickets. I looked at the house from the sidewalk, its windows glowing softly. For the first time, it didn't feel like mine. It felt like a trap I had been tricked into staying inside too long. When I came back in, Mom was on the couch watching TV. She didn't look up. Dad was in his recliner, sipping a beer. Hannah was already in her room, door closed, music playing faintly through the wall. I climbed the stairs, my chest heavy. In 2 days, everything I knew would be gone. But something my mom had whispered earlier replayed in my mind. She can't know the real reason. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I wasn't just being kicked out. I was being kept in the dark. And that, more than anything, lit a fire in me. This wasn't over. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mother's whisper echoed in my head, "She can't know the real reason." By dawn, my body was heavy with exhaustion, but my mind was on fire. I sat up, staring at the half-packed boxes along the wall. For a moment, I considered just giving up, taking my things, and leaving quietly. But then anger surged through me again. No, if they thought they could push me out without answers, they were wrong. The morning felt unusually quiet. The smell of coffee drifted up the stairs, but no voices accompanied it. When I stepped into the kitchen, Mom was at the counter flipping through mail. She froze when she saw me. Her eyes darted to the envelopes before she slid them quickly into a drawer. "Morning," I said flatly. She cleared her throat. "There's cereal if you want some." I didn't move. My eyes locked on that drawer. It was subtle, but the way her hand trembled as she pushed it shut told me more than words ever could. She didn't want me to see something. I poured myself coffee and sat at the table, watching her shuffle around the room. She wouldn't look at me. Finally, she grabbed her purse and muttered something about errands before slipping out the door. The second she left, I stood up. My heart pounded, my palms damp. I opened the drawer. Inside was a stack of envelopes, most of them thick and official-looking. Mortgage statements, late notices, bank letters. My stomach twisted as I flipped through them. Dates stretched back months, maybe longer. Several bore bright red stamps, past due. I shoved them back into the drawer as I heard footsteps in the hallway. Hannah appeared, yawning dramatically. She spotted the coffee pot and poured herself a cup, ignoring me entirely. Her robe dragged along the floor as she leaned against the counter, sipping loudly. "You look tired," she said with fake sweetness. I kept my expression blank. "Couldn't sleep." She smirked. "Big changes will do that." I wanted to snap back, but I bit my tongue. Something told me not to let her know what I'd just seen. Instead, I carried my mug back to my room and shut the door, my mind racing. By afternoon, I couldn't take the tension anymore. I grabbed my jacket and walked to the local bank, the one where I'd deposited my paychecks for years. The lobby smelled faintly of carpet cleaner, and the hum of the air conditioner buzzed in the background. I asked to see someone about the mortgage account tied to my parents' house. The teller gave me a polite smile and typed something into the computer. Then her smile faded. "I'm sorry, your name isn't listed on the account anymore." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean anymore?" She hesitated. "There have been changes made recently. I can't share details unless you're the account holder." Her words hung in the air like a weight pressing down on my chest. "Changes? Recently?" I walked out of the bank with shaky legs, gripping my jacket tighter around me even though the September sun was warm. When I got back home, Hannah's car wasn't in the driveway. Relief washed over me. I didn't want to face her just yet. Inside, Dad sat in his recliner watching sports highlights. He glanced up as I passed, then back at the screen. No greeting. Just silence. In my room, I sat on the floor surrounded by half-packed boxes. The bank teller's words repeated in my mind, "There have been changes made recently." What kind of changes? And why would they erase me from everything? I decided to check the old file box under my bed, the one where I kept pay stubs, receipts, and old paperwork. Digging through it, I found copies of mortgage statements from years ago. My name was right there, listed as a contributing signer. I remembered the day clearly. Mom had begged me to co-sign when Dad was between jobs. She'd promised it was temporary, just to keep the house secure. Now, it was as if I'd never existed. That night, as I taped up another box, I overheard voices again. Mom and Dad, this time arguing softly in the living room. "She's suspicious," Mom whispered. "She won't find out," Dad replied quickly. "She already knows too much," Mom said. "I saw her looking at the mail this morning." My heart thudded painfully. They weren't just hiding something, they knew I was close to discovering it. Suddenly, Hannah came home. I heard the door slam and her heels clicking across the floor. She sounded irritated, muttering under her breath. Then her voice rose. "Stop putting this on me. I didn't ask for all this. I don't want to deal with your mess." There was a pause, then Dad's voice, low and stern. "Keep your mouth shut. You'll do what needs to be done." I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. Mess? What mess? Later, when the house had quieted down, I tiptoed into the hallway. The living room was empty, lights dimmed. But on the coffee table sat a crumpled paper. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a notice from a credit agency. Amount due, tens of thousands of dollars. My stomach dropped. I folded it back and slipped into the shadows before anyone noticed me. Back in my room, I sat against the door, clutching the paper to my chest. My hands shook. The truth was beginning to surface, piece by piece. They hadn't given Hannah the house as some generous gift. Something much uglier was happening. Sleep didn't come that night either. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. But alongside the fear, a sharper feeling grew: determination. They thought I was blind, but they underestimated me. The next morning, I decided to test Hannah. Over breakfast, I casually asked, "So, what's it like suddenly being a homeowner?" She froze for half a second, then forced a smile. "It's fine. A lot of responsibility, but I can handle it." Her eyes flickered to Mom, who was buttering toast a little too forcefully. Dad pretended to read the newspaper, but his hand gripped the edge tightly. "Must be nice," I said, keeping my voice light. "No mortgage payments, right?" Hannah laughed awkwardly. "Well, nothing's ever free. But, it'll work out." Her voice cracked on the last words. That was all the confirmation I needed. I sipped my coffee slowly, hiding my smirk. They were lying. All of them. And now, I was sure, whatever they were hiding, it was big. The quiet weight of the house pressed against me as I sat on the edge of my old bed, the documents I had uncovered still scattered on the blanket. My chest rose and fell quickly, not from running, but from the rush of knowing something far more complicated was hidden beneath my family's smiles and lectures. Every page I touched felt like it carried more than ink, it carried truths they never intended for me to see. I kept staring at one line in particular, my hand trembling so badly the paper shook. Transfer of property contingent on confidentiality of prior incident. Prior incident? What incident? My eyes traced the faint signature at the bottom, my father's handwriting. I pressed my palm over my mouth, afraid that if I didn't, the questions building in my throat would come out in a scream. I wasn't ready to confront them just yet. Not until I had more answers. So, I moved slowly through the room, pulling open the drawers my sister had already started filling with her things. My shirts had been shoved into plastic bags, tossed aside like I was some guest overstaying her welcome. Underneath the bottom drawer, though, my fingers brushed against something thin, like folded cardboard. I tugged it free. It was an old envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with tape so brittle it cracked the second I pried it open. Inside was a photograph, faded, but clear enough to make my heart stop. My parents stood in front of the very same house I was being kicked out of, their arms linked with another couple I didn't recognize. And in the middle of them all, a child with curly dark hair, no older than 8, clutching a stuffed bear. The odd part. That child wasn't me. And it wasn't my sister. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "Family, Summer '04." My throat went dry. Summer 2004, I was 10 years old. I remembered that summer vividly, long evenings on the porch, my dad teaching me how to ride a bike, my mom scolding me for ruining my white sneakers. Nowhere in that memory was another child. The floorboard creaked, and I shoved the photo back into the envelope, sliding it under my pillow just as my sister leaned against the doorway. Her expression was smug, her arms folded across her chest. "You're still snooping? Haven't you packed yet?" she asked, her voice dripping with impatience. "I'm taking my time," I said evenly, though my pulse was hammering. She smirked, pushing off the frame and stepping into the room. "You always were slow. Maybe that's why they finally got tired of you." The jab landed, but I bit my tongue, not giving her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Instead, I studied her face, really studied it. For years, I'd brushed off the little differences between us. Her lighter hair, her sharper jawline, the way my parents seemed to favor her without hesitation. But with that photo burning in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but ask myself, was she really my sister? "Tell me something," I said quietly, standing and facing her. "Do you even know why they want me out?" Her smirk faltered for a second, and she glanced away, fiddling with the strap of her watch. It was a tiny gesture, but enough to tell me she knew more than she was letting on. "Does it matter?" she muttered, finally turning her back to me. "Just, be gone before the deadline." She walked away before I could push further, but that flicker of hesitation in her eyes only fueled my determination. That night, after they all went to bed, I sat in the kitchen with the documents again. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, seemed louder in the silence. I spread everything out on the table, cross-referencing dates and names, until one detail snapped everything into focus. The couple in the photograph. Their names were on a property deed, this very house. But scratched across the corner was a note in my father's handwriting, "Transfer after settlement, no disputes." Settlement. My hands shook as I typed the names into my phone, scrolling furiously until an article appeared. The headline read, "Local couple dies in tragic accident, survived by young daughter." I froze, rereading every line, my stomach twisting tighter with each word. That girl, the child in the photograph, she had been their daughter. And this house. It hadn't belonged to my parents at all, it had belonged to her family. I clutched the phone, my breath shallow. Was my sister that girl? Had my parents taken her in, raised her as their own, and then rewritten the story so I would never know? A faint shuffle behind me made me whip around. My mother stood there, her night robe tied loosely, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be digging into things you don't understand," she said softly, almost too softly. I swallowed hard, my voice cracking. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Her lips tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might break, might finally spill the truth. But instead, she reached over, gathered the documents into her arms, and said, "Go to bed, Ava. You'll be leaving soon enough." I stared after her as she walked away, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture wasn't complete yet. All I knew was this: whatever dark secret my family had buried, it was the reason I was being erased from the life I thought I belonged to. I went back to my room, lay down, and stared at the ceiling, my mind spinning. That girl in the photo haunted me. Was she the real daughter? Was I the outsider all along? The silence of the house pressed down like a weight, but beneath it all, one thought screamed in my head. Tomorrow, I'll find the rest of the truth. The next morning arrived heavy, like the air itself carried the weight of secrets pressing down on me. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, the girl in the photograph reappeared, staring at me with silent questions I couldn't answer. My chest ached with confusion and a stubborn fire that refused to die. I needed to know the truth, even if it tore me apart. I got out of bed early, moving quietly so no one would hear me. The house felt different now, every creak of the floorboards, every faded picture on the walls seemed to mock me. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed something odd. The door to my father's study was unlocked. He usually kept it shut, the key dangling from his pocket like a warning sign. My hands trembled as I pushed it open. Inside, the room smelled faintly of old tobacco and leather polish. Papers were stacked neatly across the desk, but what caught my eye was the drawer slightly ajar. I pulled it open and found a stack of manila folders. My heart pounded as I flipped through them. Legal documents. Adoption papers. Letters from attorneys. My eyes blurred as I read line after line, confirmations of custody, mentions of settlements, phrases like integration into new family structure. Then I saw her name. My sister's. Only, she wasn't referred to as my sister, she was labeled as adopted child of. My hands shook so violently the folder slipped to the floor, scattering papers everywhere. That sound was enough. Behind me, a sharp voice cut through the air. "What are you doing in here?" I spun around. My mother stood in the doorway, her robe pulled tight around her, her face pale but her eyes blazing with fury. I opened my mouth, but no words came. I just held up one of the papers, my voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you lie about her, about everything?" For a moment, her expression faltered. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked older than I had ever seen her. But then she straightened, her chin lifting. "Because it wasn't your burden to carry." "My burden?" I let out a bitter laugh, though it sounded more like a sob. "You're kicking me out of my home, giving everything to her, and you think I don't deserve to know the truth?" The sound of footsteps on the stairs made both of us turn. My father appeared, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting from me to the scattered papers on the floor. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked resigned. "She knows," my mother whispered. He closed his eyes briefly, then stepped into the room. "Ava, you weren't supposed to find out like this." The fury bubbling inside me finally boiled over. Then how was I supposed to find out? When I was already gone? When I was erased from this family completely? My father's silence said everything. My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of the desk for support. The betrayal hit harder than anything I had ever felt before. Just then, my sister appeared, rubbing her eyes, clearly dragged out of bed by the noise. When she saw the papers on the floor, her face drained of color. She didn't look smug this time. She looked scared. "What's going on?" she asked quietly. I picked up the photograph from the desk and held it up. My voice was raw. "You knew, didn't you? You knew you weren't really their daughter." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She just stood there, frozen. My mother moved quickly, her voice sharp. "Stop this right now, Ava. This isn't how you speak to your family." "Family?" I spat the word out. "Do you even know what that means? Because it sure doesn't look like it." Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. For the first time, my father spoke directly to me. His voice was calm, too calm. "We did what we had to do. After the accident, someone had to take her in. We gave her a life, a home. We did what was right." I shook my head, my throat tight. "And where did that leave me? Always second. Always less. Now you're throwing me out like I never mattered." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then my sister finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask them to choose me over you." Her words cut deeper than I expected, because they sounded real. Honest. And for a split second, I saw fear in her eyes, the same fear I felt. Maybe she hadn't been in control of any of this either. But before I could respond, my father's fist slammed onto the desk, making us all jump. "Enough. This family is falling apart because you can't accept reality." The room spun. My ears rang. My voice broke into a shout before I even realized it. "No, it's falling apart because you lied. Because you decided my life wasn't worth the truth." The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. My mother's shoulders collapsed, tears streaming down her face. She covered her mouth with her hand, but the sob that escaped filled the room. My father stood rigid, his knuckles white against the desk. My sister clutched her arms tightly around herself, like she was holding her whole body together. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a collapse of every lie, every secret, every fragile piece of what we called a family. I sank into the chair behind me, exhausted, my whole body trembling. The truth was out now. Nothing would ever be the same again. The clock in the hallway struck 7, the chimes echoing through the silence. It felt symbolic, like something final had just happened, though none of us moved. We just stood there, broken pieces of a family that had shattered in a single morning. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew one thing for certain, there was no going back. The air in that room was heavy enough to choke me. My parents stood frozen, my sister clutching herself like she was shivering, even though the morning sun spilled through the blinds. The silence stretched, sharp and brittle, until I finally pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood, a harsh sound that made everyone flinch. My body felt weightless, like the floor might give way beneath me. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. My mother looked up at me, her eyes swollen and red. "Ava, wait." But I didn't wait. I walked past her, past my father's clenched jaw and my sister's wide eyes, into the hallway that suddenly felt like it belonged to strangers. Every photograph on the walls, every dent in the molding, every childhood memory tucked into this house, none of it felt mine anymore. It was just a place where I had been tolerated, not loved. I went upstairs, grabbed the suitcase I had half-packed the night before, and zipped it shut. The sound was final, like the closing of a door I wasn't planning to reopen. My clothes, some photos I had saved from childhood, the little jewelry box from my grandmother, that was all I needed. Dragging the suitcase down the stairs, I expected someone to stop me. Maybe a plea, maybe even an apology. But the only sound was the wheels bumping against each step. When I reached the front door, I hesitated for a moment. Not because I wanted to stay, but because walking out meant I was officially letting go of everything I had been clinging to. Then I opened the door and stepped outside. The cool air hit me like a blessing. For the first time in days, I could breathe. The street was quiet, the only sound a lawnmower buzzing 2 houses down. Ordinary life, still going on, while mine felt like it had just shattered and reassembled itself into something unrecognizable. I rolled my suitcase down the porch steps and stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house I had once called home. I should have felt grief. Maybe I did, buried under the exhaustion. But more than anything, I felt free. I called my friend Leah, the only person I trusted enough to lean on right now. She picked up on the second ring. "Ava, what's wrong? You sound. Can I come over?" I interrupted, my throat tightening. "I don't really have anywhere else to go right now." There was no hesitation. "Of course. Get here. I'll put on some coffee." Her voice cracked something inside me, and I blinked fast to stop the tears. "Thank you." The bus ride across town was quiet. I sat by the window, the suitcase pressed against my leg, and watched the houses blur past. Families sat on porches, kids rode bikes, neighbors waved at each other. It was the kind of ordinary scene I used to envy without even realizing it. When I arrived at Leah's place, she was already waiting at the door. She pulled me into a hug before I could say a word. For a second, I let myself sink into it, letting her steady presence hold me up. Inside, she handed me a mug of coffee and guided me to the couch. "Talk," she said softly. I didn't know where to start. The words tumbled out in pieces: my parents' ultimatum, the strange papers, the truth about my sister, the explosion that morning. Leah listened without interrupting, her eyes wide but steady. When I finally ran out of words, I sat back, empty and shaking. She reached for my hand. "Ava, I don't know how you survived that long in that house. But maybe walking out was the best thing you could have done for yourself." Her words landed in my chest with a weight that felt like relief. The next few days were messy but strangely peaceful. Leah let me stay in her spare room while I figured out my next steps. I spent hours scrolling through apartment listings, circling places I could actually afford. Most were small studios with barely enough space for a bed and a chair, but they were mine for the choosing. Mine. One evening, as I packed away my clothes neatly into a borrowed dresser, Leah leaned against the doorway. "You know," she said, "freedom doesn't always look big. Sometimes it's just being able to choose where you lay your head at night." I smiled for the first time in days. Yeah, that sounds about right. By the end of the week, I found a tiny apartment on the edge of town. The rent was low, the walls were plain, and the kitchen was barely big enough for a stove and a fridge, but when I stepped inside for the first time, it felt like possibility. The landlord handed me the keys, and I held them like they were a ticket to a new life. Leah helped me move in. We carried boxes up the narrow stairs, laughing when we almost dropped the mattress. When the last box was inside, I sank onto the floor, surrounded by my mismatched belongings, and let out a long breath. "This is it," I whispered. "This is mine." Leah grinned. "Feels good, doesn't it?" It did. More than I could explain. Of course, freedom didn't erase the pain. At night, lying on my new bed, I still thought about my parents. About my sister. About how quickly they had decided I was disposable. The betrayal stung like a fresh bruise. But in those quiet hours, I also realized something else. I was no longer waiting for their approval. I didn't need their version of love to define my worth. One afternoon, I walked past a park and saw families picnicking, kids chasing frisbees, couples holding hands. Instead of aching for what I had lost, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I could build something like that, not with them, but with people who chose me, who valued me. That night, Leah and a few other friends came over. We ate takeout on the floor, laughing about nothing, and for the first time in forever, I felt what family was supposed to feel like: safe, warm, uncomplicated. Meanwhile, the silence from my parents was deafening. No calls. No texts. Not even a knock on my new door. At first, it hurt. Then, slowly, it became freeing. They had made their choice. And now, I was making mine. One morning, while sipping coffee at my tiny kitchen table, I thought about revenge. About proving them wrong. About showing them I could thrive without their house, their approval, their strings attached. But as the steam rose from the mug, I realized something powerful. I didn't need revenge. Walking away had already been the victory. They were stuck with their lies, their debts, their fragile walls of secrecy. And me. I was starting over, clean. Weeks passed, and little by little, my life began to take shape. I decorated my apartment with thrift store finds, started cooking meals in my cramped kitchen, and even planted a tiny potted plant on the windowsill. Each small step felt like a declaration: I'm here. I'm standing. I'm free. One evening, as the sun set outside my window, I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle around me. Not the suffocating silence of my parents' house, but a peaceful kind, the kind that comes when you've finally stopped fighting for scraps of love that were never yours to begin with. I whispered to myself, "This is freedom." And for the first time, I believed it.